Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about responsive images. And by responsive, I don't mean the fact that they'll shrink and grow as you change the viewport on a page. This is more to do with calling an image that is just for a mobile device or calling an image that is for the desktop device and not doubling up on that, not downloading both images for every user that comes along, or just serving one image that will suit both a mobile experience and a desktop one. Because, as you can imagine, a lot of desktop images quite large, um, quite a high file size, can be sort of 2,000 pixels wide. None of that is required for a mobile view. So how do we separate the two? And what I've done is put together a couple of examples, and you'll be able to have access to these and look at the code. So the first one that I want to talk about is so you can have an image that is set as a background, and you can have an image that is just loaded into the page. So I'm going to start off with background images. So these be backgrounds for divs in the code. So in this example, my div. Now I've given it a height in here. You wouldn't necessarily normally give a div a height, but if it doesn't have any content in it, which this one doesn't, then it won't display. So, I've given it height in the CSS. And this bit of styling up the top, the CSS, basically what it says is we want to load a background image in that is within tests, and it's called small.jpg. Then the second part uses at media, and this is only for screens with a minimum width of 400 pixels, which means that anything 400 lower than 400 will use this small image, and anything over 400 pixels will load in this large image. So here we are in Chrome DevTools, and we're looking at this image here set as a background. If we look at the sources, so these are the files that the browser has downloaded. We've got the small JPEG. That's the only one that it is loaded in. Now, if I change the dimensions of this to responsive, fingers crossed, what it should do is load in the large image, because now it has replaced the background of that div with the larger version for desktop. So it's a simple piece of CSS that can be used to control the content that goes into there. There's really nothing else to do on it. It's as simple as that. So all you need to really consider is where are your breakpoints, and 400 may be a good breakpoint. It might not be. There's a lot of further reading that you could do on breakpoints. Some websites will use a considerable number of breakpoints so that they can optimize for Google Pixel or iPhone or tablets and so on. So you can add a variety of these in, and it will call the image that's appropriate. And this is really useful, obviously, to to actually optimize by device rather than sort of saying, well, we use one image and we'll just allow it to get shrunk all the way down if somebody's on a smaller device. So this for backgrounds is the solution to that particular problem. Now, most commonly we'll be using in the code, we'll just be calling images themselves. And in this example, I've used the picture tab. Now, there are different ways that you can call a picture into HTML document. I've used the picture tag, if you like. And what this then does is we call three different sources. So the first one here is used, it's a small image. It's used with a max width of 400 pixels. The second one is, again, is for anything over 400 pixels, it will default to. And this final one will only be used if the browser doesn't support either of these two. So if it's an old browser, it might not support this kind of code, and therefore we kind of give it a default one. And if we go again to the sources, hopefully, yeah, this one has only called the large version of the image. So go back to elements. So it's using this one because we're at a responsive size of over 1,000 pixels. Excuse me. And now if we look at small version, the mobile version, so Pixel 5, it's only called small image. Now, if we drag this, if we change this around and make it responsive, it should go to the larger image. And now we've loaded in the larger image. So that is, it's one solution, and I think one solution is often enough to prove the theory to developers and to clients and say this is the best practice. You don't want to just be loading one image and using it across all devices. You want to actually be deciding based on viewport size what content you actually deliver and force people to download. So with this kind of code, we can avoid the loading of this image, which is 235 KB, and this one is 37. So when a mobile user comes, they'll be downloading 40K rather than 200 odd, which is far less relevant to a desktop user. And the final thing that I'd like to show you is native lazy loading. So that's another part of image delivery that we talk about often. And this can be done natively. If we look at the code here, there is a group of additional pictures which have currently not been downloaded. We've got a lovely picture of Duncan Coleman, and we've got another one of Tom Nelson. And so one will be loaded if we are on a mobile view, and one will be loaded if we are on a desktop view. And as we can see in the sources, neither of those have been loaded as yet. So if we start scrolling down the page, and we have to scroll quite a way actually, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but fingers crossed, some point down here, we've got an extra file pop in here, picture of Tom, which is absolutely huge, and I'm not sure when it got uploaded to the website in this format, but this is the size of Tom's lovely face on our website, very poorly optimized. And if we did this on the mobile view, then instead we would get Duncan's image turn up. Now the reason why I've had to put it 6,000 pixels down here is to do with how Chrome looks at lazy loading. So I just need to change to a different screen. Pause. And here we are looking at Chromium code, essentially. So when Chrome browser looks at lazy loading, this is native lazy loading, it actually has certain thresholds. And it does this based on, say, 4G, 3G, 2G, and so on. So that it's making sure that by the time you reach that point, it should have loaded in the image. And it's looking at distance thresholds, and they're quite high. So when I first tried experimenting with this, I couldn't get it to work. It was always loading in the image, even though it was off screen. Just because it's off screen, depending on these thresholds, will depend whether it is still waiting to be loaded in or not. So I pushed it all the way down, and that meant that when we were looking at it as an example, it loaded in as we browsed down. If it was higher up in the page, because I'm on a a home network and everything else, it was just thinking, well, I don't need to wait. I'll just bang it in straight away. So that's the reason why sometimes when you're testing lazy loading, things don't seem to be lazy loaded at all. And the bit of code that we are going to use for that, if I go back to my previous screen, so lazy loading is now native. And by that, I mean, all you need is a loading equals lazy tag in alongside your image. So you don't need third-party plugins. You don't need anything really complex to add lazy loading. You just need, when you're adding an image, you add the lazy loading tag. It's not something that you should do to an image that happens to be the largest contentful paint for a page, because obviously we want that to load in as soon as possible, but it really shouldn't impact on that anyway, fingers crossed. But it is something that you can apply to virtually every single image further down in the page, images in the footer, little icons and bits and pieces like that can all be lazy loaded. So I think these are sort of three areas of image delivery. The first two being really about responsive images, lazy loading. Just figured I'd tag that on the end. There will be some links underneath the video where I've got these examples so that you can see the code that I've used. As I said, the code, there are different ways of implementing these kind of things. So, somebody else might have a different version, but you can see how these work and how you only download the images that you need. And that saves a lot of bandwidth for your mobile users. Hopefully this has been useful. I think James said that I should say like and subscribe. Right, bye.